On this episode of The Career Musician, we have Scott Francisco. Scott studied composition and guitar performance at the University of Southern California. Scott, who now works as a composer, guitarist, and music editor for film and television. He has worked closely with many composers, including Christophe Beck, Patrice Rushen, Michael Penn, and Charles Sydnor. His compositions have appeared in numerous short films, advertisements, music libraries, network television shows, including Wreck, Girls, Malcolm in the Middle, Help Me, Help You, and Leverage. Scott has also had the privilege of working on many notable films such as the Academy Award nominated A Mother's Promise, Geostorm, Hacker, Pay the Ghost, Fame. In addition to film and television, Scott has over 2 decades of experience in record production and has contributed to albums by artists such as Mick Jagger, Puddle of Mudd, Goo Goo Dolls, Blues Traveler, Dokken, Liz Phair, and many others. Right here on The Career Musician, Scott Francisco. Scott Francisco. I love that name. Welcome to the Career Musician Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. That's a cool name, by the way.
It's kind of fake, but
okay.
It's well, the original family name was Francesca until my great-grandfather hit Ellis Island, and then he was John Francisco Sr.
You're like the umpteenth person that said that. Oh, there goes the fire engine. Yeah. That's like you're the umpteenth person that said that on the podcast. You know, everybody, once you come through Ellis Island in New York, you know.
My wife often gets asked, like, "Are you married to like a Filipino guy?" Or because there's Franciscos around, but they're all like in the Philippines. Like all the Franciscos I met are from the Philippines or like Dominican Republic, places like that.
Right, but it's Italian.
Oh, yeah. My dad's side of the family is all Italian. Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
And then so you're mixed.
Yeah, and then my mom's side are like kind of generally waspy, you know, like Anglo-Saxon types.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, I love the mixed thing. I'm Cuban-Italian. My father's from Cuba. Love the Italian stuff, so love to eat. Anyway, super glad to have you here. And what's so cool is we have a lot in common because you're a guitar player, you're an engineer, you're a composer, producer, all the above. Now, what we do have in common is the guitar first and then the composing and production. However, I am a fake engineer. Shh, don't tell anybody. So I know how to engineer really well for the shit that I do, which is mostly just recording guitar. And well, I shouldn't say that. For clients, it's recording guitar. And composing, I know how to get my way around all the DAWs and all these software. But that's for me. I have never been an engineer for clients like you have. And it was really cool because I got to witness you in action for 2 or 3 days. And, you know, just like any high-end engineer, every red fireball that was thrown at you, you were catching and deflecting and putting out. You know, you had like the proverbial bucket of water right next to you. Psh, that one's out, you know?
Yeah. Well, that was an interesting run of sessions because we worked at the really nice place where I had an assistant.
Right.
And I didn't have to touch I didn't really drive Pro Tools at all. I could just sit behind the console and like listen. And then the very next day we were in a project studio huddled together and I had to like solve every problem and put out fires and stuff. So yeah, that was both sides of it, like very quickly.
Yeah, and you were solving both sides of it very quickly.
Yeah,
you were.
It's more fun to have an assistant and like have lunch brought in and stuff like that, though.
Right, absolutely. So one of the first questions I always ask my guests is, how did the music bug bite you? I mean, we all have our stories, right?
Yeah, I had when I was a kid. My mom is the oldest of 4 sisters. So when I was a kid and we'd go to my grandparents' house, my youngest aunt was a teenager. So I'd go sit in her room. You know, I didn't want to hang out with the grown-ups anyway. So I'd go sit in her room and put on headphones and just listen to records. That's what, like nice. She put on Van Halen 1 for me. Like, imagine 9-year-old me sitting on the floor. You know those, like, brown Koss headphones you got at Radio Shack? The plastic ones?
Yes.
Wearing a pair of those headphones, and she puts on the beginning of Van Halen 1.
Oh, dude. And the first thing you hear is...
Yeah, I was kind of hooked from there on out. And she had a very... sort of like good collection of like black T-shirt rock to listen to from
I like that black T-shirt rock
from the late 70s, Cheap Trick and Skinner and all kinds of stuff like that. So that's what I got into originally. And then when I got into, I got my own stuff. I started a business cleaning tennis courts for people which says something about the neighborhood I grew up in, I guess. But I got enough money to get a CD player. I was like the first kid I knew at school that had a CD player in 1982 or 83 or whatever. It wasn't a very nice one, but it was, and I would just like buy CDs like crazy. And then finally I got a job at a record store, so I could just like take my paychecks and convert them into music without, I literally put my paycheck in the register, like you used to be able to cash checks,
that's right.
Just right back in the register and just load up on CDs. And yeah.
That is awesome, man. That's another thing we have in common. Van Halen. That's my story. When I saw him play on MTV back in 1984, I was like, "That's it.
Yeah.
I'm picking up the old guitar again because I had one under the bed."
Yeah, I remember too. They did the video for Panama. They ran as like a trailer before. I don't even know what movie. Whatever movie in 1984, 85 that was.
Right.
I remember seeing it in a movie theater, and my longtime best friend since high school, who's a much better guitar player than I am, like that's what did it for him. Like he saw the Panama video up on a big screen in a movie theater, and like it blew his mind, and that was for him. That was it for him.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. All right, so from there, you started as a guitar player, and then it morphed into composition, producing. I mean, or were you into bands? Like, what was your trajectory from there?
Got into playing guitar. I got into recording myself. I got like a little Tascam 4-track like everybody had back then.
Yep.
And
Porta One studio.
Yeah, and my friends and I would, we'd like write kind of songs and record shit, and then some of my friends started coming over and I started recording them. Like, Scott's got a 4-track. Well, let's go over to his house, and I built myself a little. There was like a room adjacent to our garage that was like just kind of like a workshop storage room. So I cleared that out and made my little rehearsal room. And it was bitching too, because the garage was like a cinder block. It was cinder block walls on 3 sides and dug into a hill. So it was literally a bunker. So we could go in there and just make a tremendous racket, and no one complained, which was great. And
was that out here? I'm sorry.
That was in Anaheim. Yeah.
Anaheim. Okay.
Yeah, I grew up in Anaheim.
Gotcha.
And moved all the way to Burbank when I grew up.
Well, which, for those of you who don't know, is about an hour north of Anaheim.
Yeah.
Burbank is the media capital of the world, as they say.
It's a pretty good.
Oftentimes.
Yeah, if you do what we do, it's a pretty good spot.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I got into like making 4-track recordings and stuff like that, and then after high school, I was always in one band or another, and so it was, we were always making demos, and at a certain point got to the point where we were making like real demo. You like go to a studio, make it, buy a reel of tape and make a real demo. Yeah. With like you had to do back then.
Sure.
And I was never happy with how they sounded. So I said, so at a certain point, I realized like I got to learn how to do all this stuff myself, or I'm never going to be happy with anything I recorded. Of course, it eventually turned out that I was never happy with anything I recorded either. But so I sort of got in and learned everything I could about engineering, and then in college I took all the classes I could. While majoring in music, I was taking recording classes and music, like electronic music. What else did I take? I didn't take any lives. I never really did a lot of live sound. I'm kind of glad I'm not deaf. I'd probably be deaf now if I did.
Yeah.
But there was like a whole like music production component to school, so I did as much of that as I could. Took a lot of film classes too, which at the time was just to eat up units, but it turned out those became useful later.
Paid off, yeah.
Yeah, I learned enough about the film making, not really about the process, but about the theory behind it. Like the kind of critical studies kind of stuff. And then that's actually served me pretty well. And then after college, my first job, I wasn't even done with college yet. I started working for Vector, which was Mike Post's old cartage and audio rental company. It was part of his empire.
Wow, really?
I didn't even know. I knew who Mike was by then. He was kind of revered, like at the USC studio guitar program. Like he's kind of revered.
The composer to the gods on everything.
Kind of, yeah. And so I got hired at this place. I didn't even know it was part of Mike's empire, and it's gone. It's where I worked, where West Wind is now. The building I worked in actually got bulldozed for the West Wind parking lot.
Holy cow. And West Wind is
the mixing stages and post-production facility in Burbank that Mike owns, and then he owns a studio next to that, and then his office is nearby.
And like we were just talking about this the other day, he's still working.
He still works. Yeah.
Where is this? You said that West Wind. Where is that facility?
It's right if you get off the freeway at Burbank Boulevard.
Yeah.
Wait, am I saying this right? No. You get off the freeway at Alameda. Sorry, I'm going to my house. Get off the freeway at Alameda going northbound. That off-ramp, that's the West Wind building, that gray building right there on the corner. It's, like all those places are kind of nondescript. Like if you don't know what it is, you never know it was there.
Yeah.
But when I was there, Mike was really smart because he created an empire and he controlled every aspect of making music for media. He was writing music. He owned the cartage company that hauled all his guys' stuff and the contractor that contracted all the sessions, and then eventually he built a studio. It's like he controlled the whole thing, and he was, every aspect of it. He was making money off of it. It was,
that's incredible.
It's pretty genius.
It's very genius.
Yeah, but at the time they still had the cartage company and the audio rentals, and it was a great job because like I had a truck, I had a bunch of stuff to deliver. John Goo is one of our clients.
Oh yeah.
Willie Ornelas, Ferroni. Arnie Eggleston was a stand-up bass player. He was one of our busiest guys.
Steve Ferroni, the drummer.
Yeah. He was kind of an oddball client because he wasn't around. He'd like be on tour for months at a time and then come back, and he had literally a ton of shit.
Yeah, of course.
I love that because we got it back from off a plane one time, and there was a bill of lading. It was 1,985 pounds or something. Like literally a ton of shit.
Oh my god, a ton, literally a ton. I love that.
Yeah, but so I had a truck, and I would just drive around to studios all over town and deliver equipment for guys, and I got to meet
Oh, so you were working for Vector, Mike's company.
Yeah.
Got it.
I almost never I met Mike like twice. I wasn't like involved with Mike, on his side with the writing and stuff, which would have been great, but but I went to every studio in town. I met every player in town. And you don't get to necessarily know all these people really well, but you see them around, and they see me. And 10 years later, when I'm doing something, where I have where I'm like part of the process, like they recognize me. It's like, oh, I remember. Didn't you used to be a cartridge guy? Yeah. It's like, oh, okay. And like
a long time ago,
they're instantly a little bit more comfortable with you because they know you. It's like, okay, I've seen this guy around. He's been out here for 10 years.
He knows
working his way up.
He knows the whole process.
He must not be retarded.
Right.
So
that's awesome.
So that's been great. That was a great entry level job to do for like a year, and then I got my first gig, like actually working for a composer. And the whole time I was still doing like engineering work or whatever else I could get and playing in bars and
So that's a very smart business plan too. So you're earning money in multiple streams of income, right? That's smart.
Multiple nominal streams of income, but yeah, sure.
But you're playing gigs.
Yeah.
You're engineering for people.
Yeah.
You're doing cartage. Okay, right? What else? That's 3 right there. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that was keeping me pretty busy, and I always had a band going, trying to get a record deal and so.
Right, and you're producing that set band.
And there was synergy there. Like the audio rentals, like I could like any piece of audio equipment I needed to record stuff for me.
You had it there.
Take it home at night. Need some 1073s to record some guitar overdubs.
Bam.
Throw my car at the end of the night, take them home, do my stuff, bring them back the next day. I mean, I asked them if I could, and they didn't mind, but
super
usually.
Dope. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Oh, by the way, where did you go to school? I meant to ask.
USC.
You did say that.
Well,
USC.
I went to Fullerton College first after I got out of high school and did their program, which was great. And
Fullerton, where is that?
It's on Harbor and Lemon in Fullerton.
Okay.
And yeah, so I went through their whole program, then went to USC.
Their whole program, they had a media
like an
program?
associate's degree, music program.
Gotcha.
And then transferred.
USC, was that a film major? Or
guitar. It was a studio
composition,
guitar.
studio guitar.
Just studio guitar. I did a little composition, but I didn't really like. I didn't. If I had to do it over again, I don't know. I might have done the composing program. Might have been.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard to say. It's my guitar playing probably wouldn't have developed as much, but my composing might have developed quicker. But the kind of it's a different. They also had like a separate like film composing program. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. They're all kind of different disciplines, So it's hard to say like what would have changed, what part of my career.
Well,
So,
it's interesting, and I always love talking to people about it because I dropped out of college. I had a scholarship to a community college in South Florida where I was growing up at the time. I'm from New York originally, but I dropped out because I got a gig.
Yeah.
But I always knew I wanted to be a session guitarist, a studio guitarist. So from then on, it was all on my own, just studies and learning a bunch of different styles. I've always loved being versatile. I love, all the genres, really. I love playing different stringed and fretted instruments, or non-fretted for that fact. So I just did it on my own without schooling. But I love talking to people who did it from the schooling vantage point because, we get to compare, green apples to red apples, so to speak,
Yeah. And I think if I had, pigeonholed myself as just a guitar player and just focused in on that, I don't know how much I could have gotten. I was, I wasn't that good. There's no way I'd be a session guy now. I don't think. I just I'm just not that good. So I sort of realized at a certain point, it's I need to learn how to do all kinds of stuff and hustle, and that's how I'm going to get by. And that's sort of how it's played out.
All right. So I love this because, gosh, there's so many things to unpack here. So the first thing is, I totally agree with you. I like the idea that you didn't just focus on guitar. The first part of my career I did, and then I just started realizing I'm not just a guitar player. I'm a songwriter, producer, composer, and then I started branching out, and that really helped me. I do think that for the younger people coming up, aspiring to do what we do, you should devote the first portion of your studies and your life to really becoming good at one or two things that you naturally, right? And then expound on that as time goes on. Wouldn't you agree? It sounds like that's what you did.
Yeah, I out of necessity I did. And also, at a certain point, you'll drive yourself insane if you just get too focused in on one thing. You have to expand your horizons, or you're going to be a really, that's when you meet these guys who like all this guy's done for 50 years is play piano. And he's really good, but he's also super weird. Yeah. And I don't really want to talk to him.
Or a little bitter even.
And eventually, especially these days, the era of the 3 sessions a day guy is long past. So, you got to find other ways. If you want to play guitar for a living all the time, you got to find other ways to, you got to find ways to get yourself out there. So otherwise, nobody's going to know about you. And, B, you got to when you're, get a nice gig, you're out on the road, great. That's nice, doing session, you can get enough regular session work to get by, sure. But, it's you still have downtime. You got to do something with it. So you got to expand out somewhere and find other things,
That's right. Now, you and I met indirectly through a mutual friend, Eric Valentine. Shout out to Eric.
Yes.
An amazing drummer, composer, producer, musician, artist, all the above, like us, right?
Yeah. He's
many hats.
The guy I record the most.
Oh, there you
recently,
go.
Yeah.
Now, you've been working with him at his studio, his project studio, which is a great studio. You have a Neve console over there. So we started doing cues for this TV show that I had a connection with, Fast Foodies, right? Which, by the way, your cues are dope. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
You and Eric were always submitting super hot cues. So we met indirectly through that, and then we got to physically meet at these sessions that we were just doing. But tell us more about your actual experience, hands-on experience with hardware in the studio, Neve consoles, outboard gear, preamps and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
How did you get that portion of your knowledge base?
Well, I had a brief, when Vector closed down, I'd been there for a year, and they're like, we're closing the company down. This is right when Westwind was going up. It's we're bulldozing this building.
Wow.
We're building Westwind, all this stuff, and you're out of a job. I lucked out and got a job with a composer right after, just kind of right out of there, seamlessly, which was pure luck. Which we'll skip for a moment and get back to, but that didn't last very long. And in the meantime, I through connections I had made being a cartridge guy and doing audio rentals and stuff, I started working for another guy who had a studio. At first, he was running a studio that another guy owned. A guy who was a big producer who had moved to Colorado and left the studio equipped but empty, so he was running it and bringing in outside clients and stuff. And so he hired me, and I worked there for a while. And then eventually that studio got shut down, and this guy who had enough gear to outfit his own studio by this point, he bought a building, put up a new studio, and I worked there for a while. I helped them. I actually helped them put everything in. We did a lot of, like swinging a hammer. Like we did a lot of work on that building before the gear went in, and then getting all the gear in. And, it was a whole thing.
Yeah.
I learned a lot doing that because that's, I already knew how to do wiring and stuff. I'd already learned a lot of that, but doing it on a scale like that is a whole nother deal.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And we're talking, this was 1997.
In the heyday of the analog.
So Studer analog machines.
Yeah.
It was a Neve 8068 with all this custom shit in it that was really it was the best sounding console I've ever heard.
Wow.
It was pretty genius.
How many channels?
It was 32, and then it had a 16-channel return, an extra little return mixer in the middle. So it was, it was big enough to do records on.
Of course.
And that was a really great studio. It's the building's still there. Somebody's in it. It's no longer a commercial. It's no longer a commercially bookable place like a lot of studios. But so I worked there for a few years, and I was like the staff engineer. And whoever came in, I was either. If a client came in and they had an engineer, then I was the assistant, and if they didn't, I was the engineer. I met all kinds of interesting people and worked on all kinds of interesting projects, and got my analog recording chops together. For sure.
That's the knob twiddling era, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was the all listening era. You actually had to listen to what you were doing.
Listen to shit.
There was nothing to look at. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, and it was a kind of a craft. Like, I already knew a fair amount about recording, although, my boss would have differed, I suppose, but, I thought I knew a lot about recording, but, knowing a lot about recording and knowing about making records are two different things. So I learned a lot about making records, and, there was a lot of producers I learned stuff from, and this was, from the time I started to the time I stopped working there was when Pro Tools basically took over, It was an esoteric rental item when I started, and it had replaced the analog tape machine by the time I left.
The mainstay.
Yeah. And it was very clear to me early on with some of the engineers I had worked with who were really good engineers, but, early on it was like you had the engineer and you had the Pro Tools guy. And, the Pro Tools guy was like this little, witch doctor over here, doing his weird shit that nobody
Computer
knew.
whiz.
And it was pretty clear to me right off the bat that as soon as that started happening that the engineer of the future is going to be the Pro Tools guy. This isn't a two-person job. Eventually, the engineer is going to have to know Pro Tools the way they know all this other stuff.
All the outboard.
And that came to pass. So I as soon as I could, I bought a little. Was the Project One? Remember those things, or the 001? Pro Tools.
Yeah. It was when Digidesign.
Yeah, this was still Digidesign.
Yes,
and the black face, triple eights. So I bought the 001. I made a record on it.
Wow.
Basically taught myself how to do Pro Tools, and then I had a long run of work where I managed to make enough money where I bought a mix system. So I had a 24-channel mix system with the old hot swap hard drive, 18 gigabyte hot swap hard drive, the whole thing.
18 gigabyte.
Yeah. So I had a real
That's
Pro
like
Tools
a drop
rig.
in the bucket now.
Yeah, it's amazing we made records on that shit.
Wow.
So I was, I had a Pro Tools rig you can make a record on, and then I started renting that out. I mean, it was still a rental item then. So if they rented in a Pro Tools system at the studio I worked at, it was mine. And very often it was making more money than I was. But
Very smart.
That was great. And that was the first time I started to really get ahead.
Very smart. See? I like that.
Yeah.
Expound on that, if you will.
Well, I got I think I borrowed $15,000 from my dad. Mm-hmm. And then I had I forget what I think it cost me about $25,000 to put the system together or something back then. Mm-hmm. I paid my dad back in 6 weeks. He was
very happy.
He was incredibly surprised. And that thing, I had that thing rented out a lot. And, sometimes I was a Pro Tools guy, and, if I was a Pro Tools guy, they were renting my rig from me, or they had a Pro Tools guy and he was renting my rig. It was sometimes a pain in the ass because, renting stuff to people was always a pain in the ass.
Sure. Do you remember the rate that kind of gear was getting back then?
It's getting like $400 a week.
That's not bad, man. That's passive income, bro.
Yeah, it depended on the gig, whatever. I think you could get a rig for like $150. It was kind of weird because it's like a 4-day week,
Okay.
You do a 4-day week, 3-day month. So if the rig was rented out for a month, it'd be 12 days, and you could get on a good on a good project you can get like $200 or $300, and like on a cheap one, not as much. But it certainly added up very quickly. And then as soon as the Blue HD systems came out, the original Excel system that ran at 96K, that was when tape was done.
Right.
Like everyone dumped tape like almost immediately,
including DA88s and ADATs.
Oh, all that shit.
That all went out.
Oh, thank God.
I did a lot of records on DA88s, man. Yeah. A lot.
The only thing I ever got nominated for a Grammy for, we did on ADATs.
Really?
Yeah.
What was that? What'd you get nominated for?
It was this band from Mexico called Jaguares, which are a huge band in Mexico.
Nice.
We did it was a half live. It was like Wheels of Fire. It was like half live, half studio record. It was double record. And did the studio half, and it got nominated for the like best Latin rock album.
That's awesome.
And I had done a lot of engineering on. I was originally the assistant, and then I ended up doing a ton of engineering on it and getting an engineer credit. So if it had won, I would have got that Grammy. But Santana ran the table that year.
Damn it, he sure did.
Damn it, Carlos. Carlos is a very nice man, but I will always hold a grudge.
That's funny. All right. So you figured out. Sorry, I was going to say the game, but it's not a game. But you figured out how to. You know what? I'm making money on a daily basis doing what I do. My hours for dollars as an engineer. But I'm also renting out my gear, my system. So now I'm creating some kind of passive stream, which I love. I'm a huge proponent of that. And you're hustling, you're doing these things, you're still playing. How did you get into the composing side? You had mentioned you worked for a composer for a while.
There was a guy who, like, still one of my best friends, 25 years on.
Oh, awesome.
He was one of Mike's guys originally. And he had branched off. I mean, Mike has this whole, there's this whole community around, current and ex-Mike guys.
Like all the big composers.
Yeah.
Hans Zimmer has the same thing and so forth.
Yeah, Mike was the prototype for what Hans Zimmer was doing with film.
Gotcha. For TV.
Yeah, in terms of like having guys, having a factory, and the product of the factory is music. And I don't mean that in any sort of like disparaging way, but it is very much an industrial process when you're cranking out music on a scale like that.
On that scale, yeah.
Yeah, which is, it's daunting to be creative on an industrial scale
level. That's right. That's right.
But anyway, this composer called me. It was literally my last week at Vector. We were like, tearing stuff out, like, moving all the stuff off.
Perfect timing.
Royal was coming by, picking up all our client stuff. And I get a call, and it's Charlie. Hey man, it's Charlie. Well, what's going on? He's like, well, because he was doing one show. He was a client. He was also a cartridge client because he had this great rig where, because this is in the days of samplers and D88s and stuff, where he had a rig where he had all his samplers and stuff racked up, and he would write in his office, write everything, make demos, get them signed off on, and then he'd have like a 5-piece band, and he had a bunch of elements that were keeper, and then like the temporary stuff that sort of did what the band was gonna do. This was like it was a Western he was doing, so it was like all acoustic stuff. And then he would all the samplers and stuff on the truck to the studio, hooked up, locked a picture, and then the real guys would play along with the samplers, and that was your finished score.
You gotta love that.
And I mean, it was going straight to it was going straight to a D88 live, like it wasn't multi-tracked, nothing, and it worked great. And he picked up a second show, and he calls me up and he says like, hey, I picked up a second show. I'm gonna be really busy in the fall, and I need a guy who he can read music, he understands orchestration, he understands the technology, he can just kind of do all these things. And he's like, do you know anybody like that? I was like, yes, me. And he's like, okay, great. And that was that.
You gotta love that.
Yeah, I just fortunately I answered the phone and not the other guy I worked with who probably could have done it too.
See? Tenacity, baby. You gotta grab the bull by the horns. I always say that. People are gonna get tired of hearing me say that. You have to be tenacious. You have to go for it.
Yeah. And that was one of those gigs. Like, I wasn't nervous about that one in terms of sometimes you say yes to a gig. You say yes to the gig, and then you figure out how to do the gig. It wasn't really like that. Like, I knew how to do everything. I wasn't worried about faking it till I make it. It wasn't that kind of situation. And yeah, so I worked with him for a while. Unfortunately, both the shows disappeared quickly through a series of unfortunate circumstances beyond our control. Yeah. We went from having 2 shows to no shows. So then I was unemployed again, and that's when I started working full time as an engineer for a while. There was a period of a few years there, and then eventually, when I got out of recording full time, which I was ready to do by then, because it's, I mean, I was pushing 30 when that happened, and by then, like, I had just gotten married, didn't have any kids yet or anything, but I had just gotten married, and I'm working. Like, I remember one time there was a span where 26 weeks I worked 6 days a week, recording studio hours, so 12-hour day plus whatever overtime and the hour before to get ready. And, it's brutal. And then, the Sundays start disappearing as the deadline approaches.
Right.
So I remember falling asleep. It was 26 weeks leading up to Thanksgiving. And then we worked like all night Wednesday night to get done. And then Thursday, I'm at my parents' house and I literally fell asleep at the Thanksgiving table.
Oh, my goodness.
And, yes.
26 weeks, that's half the year.
Yeah, it was half a year with, maybe Sundays off. And, I like.
Can you say the band or no?
It wasn't one project.
Oh, okay.
Most of it was the first Puddle of Mudd record, which is one of the bigger records I ever worked on in terms of sales. But there were a couple things leading up to that, and then that, and they were all just like bam, 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 no time off.
And which studio or various studios?
This was a place called Third Stone, which it's by the Denny's at Burbank and Lancashire.
Nice.
And remind me about that. I'll tell you a story about the Denny's later, but I don't want to get off track. Okay. But at that point, I wasn't exhausted, but, it's like, man, I don't know if I want to work these kind of hours like the rest of my life, for sure. Mm-hmm. And then the same composer calls me up and says, hey, I got a composing job and I need a guy. Do you want to do it? And I'm like, well, I'd consider it. What does it pay? And he told me what it pays. And I said, absolutely. Because it was a trade up. And
now this composer Charlie, you said?
Charlie, yeah.
Can you say?
Charlie Sydnor.
Sydnor, okay.
Yeah, he's still one of my best friends.
Awesome.
And he lives like 5 minutes that way.
Really?
Yeah. But this was Malcolm in the Middle, so I worked on Malcolm in the Middle for 5 years.
Oh,
and I was
amazing!
I was like Charlie's guy. And
now were you? So when you tell the audience what you mean by that. I have a good idea of what you mean.
Well,
but
he was a composer.
Yeah.
And I did everything. He had started out as a music editor.
Wow.
Which is what composers do when they don't have any composing to do.
That's right.
So he started out as a music editor and then eventually got bumped up to composer. That's when he called me and they were starting this next season. So then he was the composer, but he was still also handling all the music editing, which is why he needed a guy. So I started doing, like, he basically taught me how to be a competent music editor, which is a whole other job, as far as, the combination of musical knowledge and technical knowledge and, all that. So, I got the hang of that fairly quickly. And then I was also doing, I was his engineer and played a bunch of guitar on stuff. And,
nice.
we did, like, between the two of us, and then we also had the music supervisor, Julie Houlihan.
Oh, and, John Houlihan's wife.
Yeah, John Houlihan's wife. Kevin's sister-in-law and Patrick's. The Houlihan clan.
The Houlihan, that's
they're all
right.
music supervisors.
Oh my gosh, that's so crazy. That's so true.
Yeah, so between the three of us, we basically got everything done. Like whatever the show needed musically, like we made it. Julie found it or Charlie created it, and I helped Charlie create it. And we did everything that way. Hey, this is Scott Francisco, and you're listening to The Career Musician with Nomad.
Blasting the stereotype of musicians. Follow us at the Career Musician Podcast.
Want to learn more about a particular topic? Tag @TheCareerMusician and use #CareerMusician to let us know what you'd like to hear.
Now, did you have a flat salary with Charlie, or was he paying you as a guitar player, as an editor, as a mixer?
Nah, I was just I had a
here's your weekly salary.
I had a weekly rate, and after the show was a big hit, it went up a little bit, which was great.
Amazing. And 5 years you did that.
Well, yeah, I did the seasons 3 through 7 because I've been on 2 already, and so that was a nice run. And we
That's
had
a dream job.
Yeah, it was great, and that was the thing. Like that was my first TV job, and the associate producer, the guy in charge of post production, would always tell me man, they're not all like this.
This is a good one.
This is a good one, man.
That's right.
Don't expect all your other gigs after this to be like this. And
yeah.
Was he right?
It's a trip, isn't it?
Yeah, but we had an office, we were in the Norvette building at CBS Radford. So the main sound stage was in the first floor of the building.
Yeah.
You go up the elevator, and the writers' offices. You get out of the elevator, and there's a suite. To the right were the writers' offices, and to the left was all of post production.
Yeah.
Editors, all the AP, the post coordinator, all in this one little suite of offices, and then we had the other big office that usually the second editor would have because we only had one editor. So Charlie and I lived in there, and all the music for the show, unless we did a session for something, which we didn't really do a ton of sessions, all of it came out of there between him and me,
Wow.
And Charlie wrote, he would write, hand stuff off to me, put the guitar on. Charlie, there was like a lot of accordion. Like Charlie's a good keyboardist, and he plays accordion. So like there's a fair amount of accordion. So I'd record the accordion. He, all the keyboards would already be on there because he'd do it while he was writing. Then I'd play guitar. Then we'd have a bass player. Dominic Genova did most of the bass. He'd come in and play bass, and that was really the only guy we recorded every week.
That's
all the drums were. We do a couple sessions every once in a while, and then we tend to reuse drums and stuff. Or use artificial means for drums. And that's how we did the stuff week to week. And then every once in a while we'd have to do some special thing where we do a proper session. And I'm sorry. We'd usually go to Third Stone to do the sessions, which was great because I was familiar with everything.
Yeah, you knew the whole rig.
Yeah, and we didn't need, I could just be the engineer and, so we really never there were very few other people involved with the music process most of the time.
So you and Charlie really developed a good little synergistic workflow.
Oh yeah, we were very smooth.
And you guys had a Pro Tools rig that you were working on.
Had a couple, yeah.
Couple, of course. Yeah, it takes a lot of juice.
We adopted composing in Pro Tools very early on.
Smart.
Probably earlier than anyone should have done. Because the MIDI in Pro Tools, we're talking like version 5. The MIDI was just when it went from 4 to 5, the MIDI was finally passable for what we needed to do, which was basically treating it like a tape machine. We weren't doing anything complex. We were just playing stuff in. Everything was played by hand, and it had a played by hand kind of feel, and that's all we needed, so we could get by like that. If we were doing like complicated MIDI stuff, it would have been a nightmare. But
that show was perfect because it was all campy, kind of organic,
and
acousticy.
And it started off with They Might Be Giants doing the first 2 seasons, which had like a very sort of homemade kind of quirky vibe. So it it lended itself to that.
Right.
So we just moved on from there. And one of my jobs, like handling the music editing, is we would occasionally take Giants stuff from early on and kind of repurpose it through the show to kind of keep a little bit of continuity stylistically. So
they licensed some of the Maybe Giants catalog?
No, it's just old cues that, cues they had written for the first couple episodes that we would just and, for whatever the Giants had a thing where they would write a cue for a spot and then whatever spot they wrote the cue for, the cue would end up somewhere else. It was just kind of this weird thing,
So talk to us about music editing. You said you also cut your teeth with Charlie there and he taught you the ropes of that.
Yeah, I mean, from the time I was on Malcolm on, that's been my primary source of income as a job. So he basically taught me, and Charlie had been doing, he had worked for Mike for a long time. He was doing music editing. He was Mike's, he did engineering for Mike. He wrote stuff for Mike. He wrote, then he went out and got his own gigs and worked as a composer doing his own gigs. He still does composing, still does music editing, just like me. Although he does, the ratio of composing to music editing is inversely proportional for the two of us. But yeah, he basically taught me how to do the job. And then it's not a particularly difficult job on a technical level, compared to cutting up drums on records and stuff, piece cake.
Yeah, Beat Detective and all that crap. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, but you do have to understand, you have to understand filmmaking to a certain degree. You have to be musical. All the good music editors are musicians, and one good musicians, not I play a little piano kind of, like Tom Carlson is one of the best music editors, who was a Cartridge client of mine. It's funny because I never talked about music editing with him really because it wasn't on my radar then.
Wow.
It was kind of a missed opportunity there. But he was he played tuba. He was a really good session guy tuba player. But it's do I want to play tuba?
What an anomaly, right?
Yeah, it's wow. There's only so much work for tuba. So
like the old joke. What's the definition of a what do you say? Not an optimist.
Yeah, the trombonist.
A trombone player with a pager.
Yeah. So
tuba player with a cell phone.
Yeah, and he's been one of the big feature music editors for the last since the mid-90s. Wow. I met him in the mid-90s, and he already was, and he still is. So I learned, Charlie taught me what I needed to know, and then I kept developing from there. And a lot of music editing is managing people and managing the relationship between the composer and the music supervisor and the producers, and sort of being a buffer between various factions. Not that they're necessarily in conflict, but in order to you're kind of the oil in the gears that kind of keeps everything smooth, and all the music comes in, goes through the music editor, and then back out where it needs to go, either into the editorial process as the cuts are being developed, or at the end of the day when the show's got to get mixed, and just dealing with all of that, and then dealing with the mix stage.
You're doing a lot of alternate mixes and stems and breakouts and whatnot, or
a lot of
cut downs.
A lot of stems.
Yeah.
A lot of most guys now are stemming stuff like
anyway, right?
But they're stemming it very wide. I mean, there's a lot of shows. Like I just did a Sweet Tooth for Netflix, and we were stemming where basically every element of the mix, musically, of the mix for the cue is its own stem.
Yeah.
Every single thing. So there's like 20, 40 stems. Which gets nuts, because then you got to think like, okay, well I got 20 stems of this cue, and then this cue starts. So it's also 20 stems. So now I got 40.
Right.
Because they got to overlap.
Now it's funny because I jumped in with a production company here maybe 8-9 years ago or so. And that's when I really cut my teeth on building those stems for the editors, for the show editors. And it's like the editors are acting as a composer in their own right, or some kind of a sub-composer, right?
Well,
how did this all... Yeah, tell us the history on that.
Well, I deal mostly with scripted, single camera stuff, mostly I prefer working in television to working in features for mostly personal life reasons, and because I have kids and I want to see them, and
that's right.
But the scripted, single stuff that's shot like a movie for television. So generally the editors will either give me a blank, I'll get an editor's cut and there's no music in it. Like, here you go, do it, temp the whole thing, which is fine. I actually like working that way. It's a lot of extra work, but the temp score is much better than the editors can do, and that's nothing on the editors. Right. Like, even the ones who are really good with music, there's only so many hours in the day.
It's time constrained.
Yeah, exactly. It's extremely time consuming for them.
Yeah.
So,
and to do both of those jobs is, come on.
Yeah. And there are some editors who insist on doing their own music. Like, no, man, I don't want you touching the music. I'm like, all right, have a ball. But the thing that sucks for that usually is that if I do the temp music, I'm usually working with the stems. I'm crafting stuff very carefully, and it's much more polished than the picture editor or the picture editor's assistant or whoever is cutting the music over on that side could get it, because generally they're dealing with the stereo mixes. Right. They're not like getting into the stems. That's too much, and they don't have the familiarity with the material that I have. And it depends also on where we are in the process. Like if it's the first few episodes of a show, there is no music. There's no music we own, so it's got to, I got to temp it from whatever, and that's going to sort of inform what the composer is eventually going to write to a certain degree.
Do you pull from your catalog or other catalogs, or an amalgam?
I generally, it's pretty rare that anything I've written from my personal stuff would be perfect for whatever I'm looking for anyway. So, I mean, if I did, I would stick it in there, and I would, but I'd make sure everybody's like, hey, I wrote that. I'm not trying to like stuff my own shit in your show.
I just had it handy.
Yeah, if it works, it works. But there's when the music library is all shifted to like being able to like search everything online.
Yes.
Where you didn't need like a CDs or a big hard drive and all that stuff.
Audio, baby.
It's so much easier. But a lot of what I do is either from material I already have from shows I've done, or shows I've gotten from other guys. We kind of like, there's a little black market in music from shows, and my wife also is involved with TV music, so I can get stuff from her. And sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's great if you can find stuff from a show you already worked on that you can use for temp, because you have the stems and you can do much more with it, which is really great. But you find it just wherever. Anything's fair game. It's temp. We're not going to keep it. We don't have to, it doesn't matter what it would cost to license, because we're not going to use it.
Right.
And everybody knows, like the temp score, we can't use it.
Yeah. So if it's a Coldplay song, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
'Cause
and
it's just temp.
Yeah, and I mean, mostly I'm not talking even about songs as much as, like score.
Score,
Like,
right.
the songs usually the music supervisor will send in songs.
That's right.
And,
That's
it's
true,
like,
yeah.
okay, great, I'll cut these in. If I have a great idea, I'll stick mine in. If it's, usually that's okay. And then we'll go from there. And then once the show has a library of its own music that it owns and we can keep, then I can start cutting that stuff in. And then hopefully, like a lot of shows we do, like I do a lot of stuff with Joe LoDuca. He's like the main composer I do stuff for. And he tends to work with like genre shows, like we're doing the Chucky series for Peacocks, the next thing we're doing, and stuff like that. There tends to be a lot of music, more than a composer could be expected to write week to week. So the idea is like, of the stuff I'm cutting in, I'm trying to get keepers, stuff we can just keep that already exists that the composer doesn't have to write. And every time I do that, I get a little gold star from the composer. So if I can cut the temp score, I can get more of those than if the editors do, because I'm going to give it much more attention.
And you're sourcing those from libraries?
I'm sourcing that stuff from the stuff that already exists for the show, so we can keep it.
Oh, okay.
Right?
So you're repurposing what's already there.
Yeah, and every time I do that
Got it.
for the composer, it's like, ding,
Right.
nice job.
Now he's happy.
I like you,
You're right.
You're saving me hours of work.
Saving hours of work, and you're getting multi-uses on one piece.
Yeah, and a lot of shows like that, that's part of the process. It's not like some sneaky trick we're doing. It's
No.
like that's just how it works.
And it keeps it cohesive. It
Yeah.
all sounds smooth and connected.
Yeah, and then when you're talking about like the stuff where the editors are cutting up stems, like
Yeah.
but like more sort of reality based, like
Yes.
Foodies
Thank
is a
you.
perfect example. There's no music editor. Like
Right.
the editors are cutting all that stuff in, and they're cutting it
Quick.
like they're cutting sound, and it's kind of funny because we actually we had a Fast Foodies episode we just had the audio of, and we wanted to listen to it down to see where where our tracks popped up,
Right.
and it was jarring to listen to
Yeah.
without watching,
Without
because
watching it,
then you
right.
really realize like how much they're going from track to track and how brutal it is when they're
right.
cutting. And I think in that case, like those guys, like there is no music editor to smooth out your edits, so they need the stems, so
Yeah.
they're getting the stems, and they're probably trying not to touch them if they don't have to.
Right.
Right.
Right. Because it saves them time.
Yeah, and the reality thing is, that's its own animal, and
It's a whole
there's
other game.
there's generally the picture editors generally cut their own music, and they have a lot more. The editorial staffing is larger because they have so much footage. There's guys that have to log all that footage. There's guys who have to cut, sequences together, and then there's the editor who like cuts the sequences together into the show, and the music's getting handled along with all of that. So
Right.
that's its own other beast. Because like the stuff we did for Foodies, we weren't scoring to picture. It's
Nope.
not like we got a cut of the show and we wrote the music. We just like wrote a bunch of tracks.
We get a brief.
Yeah,
that
it's
says,
like we want stuff like this, okay, and then we knock it out. It's more like making a little tiny record,
That's right.
That's what
That's
Eric
right.
and I were doing. We were just making little records, which is like the kind of stuff we were doing because with Eric, I was doing like all the rock and roll stuff, so it was
Yeah.
all real drums, real guitars,
Black
real
Keys
bass
type vibes.
Yeah, so
yeah.
like that was pretty time intensive as opposed
It
to doing
is.
like
Yeah.
like the electronic stuff or the more hip hop stuff where you got loops, you got synths. It's not any easier, but it's less manpower intensive for sure.
Yeah. No, that's why it was great. We made a great team. Because funny, my studio guy Eric, we both have an Eric that we work with. He and I were doing the same thing, just in different process. Because obviously Eric Valentine plays drums, Eric G, who works with me, plays keys.
Right.
But you and I both play guitar, so it was neat. We were getting a lot of catalog in that show.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll see some good residuals from that show. But what I'm teaching my listeners about here too as well, the career musician, our premise is our mission statement is sustainability. Right? How to have a long-term sustainable career.
Yeah.
And that's why I kind of started with you in that fashion to pick your brain, and you're a great example of that.
Yeah.
You have to diversify.
Yeah.
Right?
And the Fast Foodies thing was a great, like, when I first heard of, when Eric first told me about that, I'm like, dude, that is like right in my wheelhouse.
We can
It's
crush
like,
it. Yeah.
it's like, making little rock and roll records for TV. Like that is
And it's fun.
that is my skill set. Like that ticks every box on my skill set perfectly.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Now,
okay, you've told us so much, and thank you for sharing with all of your experience throughout, the different facets of the industry. tell us what you see on the horizon. If a young musician comes up to you and says, Scott, man, I want to do what you do, and she or he or them, they play whatever instruments, and they have a varied set of skills, but they just kind of don't have their path set out yet. What are you going to tell them?
Well, keep an open mind, and it's not like I planned all this out. It's like opportunities presented themselves to me and I took them, and that's where I'm at. And part of me is like, part of me is bummed that I'm not John Williams, but my consolation prize is a solid career in show business so far. So
that's right.
It's worked out.
That's so funny you say that, because I can relate. Part of me is bummed that I'm not, with Brian Tyler or Tyler Bacon, two of my favorites.
Yeah. But the big thing for me is like try not to pigeonhole yourself too early, and you have to really learn the technology, because the technology is advanced to the point where you don't need an engineer.
Right.
Well, you need someone in the room has to know how to do this stuff right. But you don't need an engineer per se, because there is no console, there is no tape machine. Here's a laptop. Can you get good sounds out of that? That's one of the things that bums me out about, because I worked on Girls, right? And our end title was always a different song. We'd go to black, there'd be a song. HBO, you can get away with that. And it's so funny because it was mostly like hot off the presses kind of stuff.
Yeah. Stuff that's trending. Yeah.
Yeah, and various, like, not in any one genre necessarily, but like kind of it was usually the hot new thing. And there was more than a few times the re-recording mixer we'd get to that song and she'd hear it for the first time and she would turn around to me and look at me like, "Is this an MP3?" Which, it's like, no, it's not an MP3. It just sounds like ass. and she's a very, the re-recording mixer, she was a very good engineer. She worked for Rick Rubin and stuff. So she knows what's up. Shit, yeah. As well as having a wall full of Emmys. Yeah, wow. And so she'd look at me like, well, like, is this an MP3? I'm like, no, that's just what the track sounds like. I had an irate different mixer call me one time because we had that Imagine Dragons song Demons. Oh yeah. Right? With that really weird drum sound. Mm-hmm. Like, call me up from the stage, like call me at home, like, dude, what's up with this song? This file's all messed up. It's like, what are you talking about? It's like, it's all distorted and it sounds weird. What'd you do? And I'm like, no, man, that's what the song sounds like. Sorry.
That's a high-res file.
Yeah, that's a 48K wave, and that is actually what the song sounds like. And that's Imagine Dragons. It's not like, some like band you never heard of. Right. And so,
but you have to go with the times.
Yeah, and sounds, it does bug me too. I hear stuff now and it's just like, why is the vocal distorted? Like, I've spent my entire career trying to make stuff not distorted, and now everything's distorted. Why? Because that's the easiest thing to do if you don't know what you're doing. Mm-hmm.
That's right.
If you can't make it sound good, make it sound weird. And it's kind of a cop out.
I like that.
Yeah,
I like that.
But wow. I'm just an old guy shouting into the void.
No, I love it, man. I love it. Okay, so any last words of wisdom?
Oh, yes, I do have one point I wanted to make. When I got into music editing, the big thing about music editing is very often you're getting paid by the episode. And, you have your deadlines, you have your work to do, and you're not necessarily living there. You're not living. I mean, the Malcolm thing was kind of a weird. That was kind of an exception to the rule. But generally, you're not living with your show. It's like you have the work. I work at home in my pajamas most of the time. Yeah. So the only thing limiting me in terms of what I can make is how many shows I can manage. How much work I can get done without spreading myself too thin.
In a week,
yeah. So no longer am I getting dollars for hours. I'm getting dollars for a piece of work done. That's when I started to really make some dough. And that doesn't just apply to music editing. Like, there's a lot of other jobs that are like that. Not all of them. Like if you're a re-recording mixer, well, at least pre-COVID, you were at a dub stage working, 10 hours a day or whatever it is. And, there was no way to there's no way to go away from that. But, music editing, composers, various other things. And now, like, a lot of editors are working from home. In the COVID era, everyone moved home, figured out they could do it just fine from home.
That's right.
So I think some of that's not going to go away ever.
That's right.
And, if you can knock out work from home, you can do as much, it's up to you how much work you can do if you can get the work and you can really get ahead. You can do a lot better than just getting by that way.
Right. Let me add this though. That's when you must really learn how to successfully self-manage.
Yes, you have to.
Yeah.
You have to manage your time, and if you have kids, you have to be able to manage your kids.
That's right.
And fortunately, for me, my kids are a little bit older now, so they're not super. They're middle schoolers. They're not. Like when my
Same here, my
yeah,
daughter,
like when my kids were like 2 and 4.
Yeah.
That was really hard.
Of course.
That was really hard, and sometimes I didn't think I was going to make it. But eventually you get over that hump where your kids can okay, can you go do something for half an hour? Okay, great, bye. So that's been good. But I have time. I coach baseball.
Nice.
I can get my work done. Sometimes I got to stay up late, but it's I can coach baseball. I can have dinner with my family, and I can still get all this work done.
That's a good thing.
And the composing stuff's a little harder because those deadlines are sometimes kind of nuts, and sometimes I got to disappear for a week. But that's okay. My wife can handle it, and but it's weird. I disappear for a week, but I'm still home.
Right, of course.
I'm home. You're not going to see me.
Studio home.
Yeah, I'm out in the studio, which is separate from the house, and you'll see me every time I have to pee, and that's about it.
So, by the way, what does your wife do? You said she works in TV music.
She works for Warner Brothers. Yeah, she works in the TV music department, doing administrative type stuff.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I'm sure she's signed your checks
I
for
bet.
a few things.
I bet. Well, tell her hi. What's her name?
Susan Francisco. Yeah.
I love it. Well, good to meet you, Susan, via your other half, because she's the better half to you. Right? All the wives are the better half. What was I going to say? Yes. What happened at Denny's?
Oh, okay. So one of the projects I worked on at Third Stone was Mick Jagger's "Got Us in the Doorway" album, which was really cool. Third Stone was kind of a weird place because it was a pretty good sized studio. Mm-hmm. We had 2 rooms, and the larger tracking room was pretty spacious. I mean, you could easily do we did tons of it was a great drum room actually. Mm-hmm. To do a rock band, it's great, but you could also fit I think the biggest session I did in there was maybe 20 guys, but you could have fit more. So it was a good sized room. But we kind of became the Cadillac overdub place. You'd go to NRG or Capitol or whatever and track your drums, and then you come to Third Stone and set up all your shit and do your overdubs for months at a time.
Love that.
So for the Jagger thing, that's what happened. They tracked all over the place, and then they were just doing vocals and some guitars and stuff there. And it was great for him because he just booked the whole building, both rooms, the whole building. It was just him, nobody hassling him.
Wow.
It was great. But anyway, and he was really great to work with, and it was just, it was him, the producer, the engineer, Rich Chicky was the engineer. He was a really good engineer.
Who's the producer?
Marty Fredrickson.
Gotcha.
Who did, he did all the songs for, what was the Cameron Crowe movie about the, Almost Famous? Was that Cameron?
Oh, I don't remember.
Yeah, he did all those songs, and all the singing, all of Billy Crudup's singing, I think is him. But anyway, yeah, so we're there one day, and they're arguing about what they want for lunch. And it is a bunch of English guys, arguing with or half English guys, half American guys. Yeah. They were watching Premier League soccer in Spanish on TV because that's the only way you could get it. And they were arguing about lunch, and finally Mick goes, "Hey man, let's just go to Denny's. I'm not a snob." So immediately I'm like, Mick, we're going to Denny's, and I'm buying. I'm taking you to Denny's.
Wow.
And eventually he chickened out, and they ordered from Zomba or something. But I was this close to going to Denny's with Mick Jagger. So
you gotta love that. But he would have been clobbered the moment he walked out of the car to go into the parking lot and to just forget about it.
Yeah, I don't know, but it would have been fun. That would have
been crazy.
And all I got was a decent story out of it.
That's a killer story. I love it. Scott, where can people find you online?
I'm on Facebook, and otherwise I'm pretty anonymous.
Okay. It's so funny because...
Well, I have my website. ScottFranciscoMusic.com. That's my website.
Scott?
Yeah, Scott Francisco, just like the city.
Francisco.
Music.com.
Music.com. Okay.
Yeah.
It's so funny because a lot of people in the biz prefer to stay anonymous and behind the scenes, and rightfully so, because a lot of the stuff you're working on, you have to sign NDAs, or you just can't talk about it.
Yeah, to a certain degree, but mostly it's I have my clientele, and I don't need my clientele is very specific to the business,
right.
and I know who I like the people I need to know, I know, and I'm good, so I don't
That's
need
it.
to
Yeah.
you know. But yeah, there's all my I got all my stuff on my website, so you can check out I got some of my music and some video and stuff. So
Perfect.
it's all there.
Brother, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I can't wait to get you here in my studio to help me rewire some things. So
Yes, I'll fire up the soldering iron.
there you go.